A whisper on the wind could topple an empire. Knowledge was so tightly controlled in the Middle Ages that sharing a single forbidden book was a crime punishable by death. This is the story of Windcode, a brilliant system of secret signals that smuggled entire libraries of ideas right under the noses of kings and inquisitors. By the end of this journey, you will understand how invisible messages carried by the air itself preserved the very ideas that built our modern world. How did scholars use simple breezes to send complex messages across miles of guarded territory? What ingenious methods made these signals undetectable to those who hunted them? What does this forgotten art teach us about our own fight for information today? Long before it became a tool for scholars, the fundamental idea was already whispering through the deserts. Ancient herders and travelers moving across vast and empty landscapes noticed something profound about their environment. The wind was not just a force of nature, it was a constant companion, one that could be listened to with more than just your ears. They learned to interpret subtle shifts in the breeze, using changes in its strength or a shift in its direction to send simple, pre-arranged signals. A sudden gust from the east might mean turn left, while a sustained gentle wind from the west could signal that a water source was nearby. This was communication that left no physical trace, no footprints or marked trails, making it perfect for coordinating movements across territories where being unseen was a matter of survival. This primitive yet effective system did not go unnoticed. Monastic scribes, often the sole keepers of written knowledge in the early medieval period, recorded observations of these nomadic practices in their chronicles. They noted how entire groups could seemingly vanish into a landscape, only to reappear in a coordinated fashion miles away, guided by nothing but the air itself. For these scribes, living in an age where powerful institutions were beginning to tightly control the flow of ideas, the potential of such a system was revolutionary. They saw that the simple wind signals of the desert could be adapted, transformed from a tool for physical navigation into a vehicle for intellectual smuggling. As censorship intensified and the penalties for possessing forbidden texts grew more severe, the need for a secure communication method became desperate. The basic wind signals, which might convey one of only a few simple messages, were no longer sufficient. Scholars and free thinkers began to layer complexity onto this ancient foundation. They started to encode information not just in the wind's direction, but in its patterns, its duration, and even the specific times it was observed. A series of 3 short gusts at dawn could represent one letter, while a long, steady breeze at noon might represent another. This evolution from a simple directional cue to a complex symbolic language was the critical leap. It marked the birth of true Windcode, a system robust enough to carry entire philosophies, scientific theories, and chapters of forbidden books across borders, all hidden in plain sight, carried on the very breath of the world. The ingenuity of this system, however, lay entirely in its execution. How do you build a reliable, secret network using something as seemingly random as the wind? The forest itself became a conspirator. Among the dense trees and howling mountain passes, where watchful eyes could be anywhere, the first practitioners of Windcode turned to sound. They crafted instruments designed not to stand out, but to disappear into the acoustic landscape. A hollow reed, a carefully shaped wooden whistle. These were not musical tools but cryptographic devices. Their sounds were subtle, mimicking the whine of wind through a rocky crevice or the sudden hiss of a gust through dry leaves. To a passing guard, it was just the weather. But to a trained listener stationed downwind, it was a clear and deliberate message. the system relied on modulation, changing the pitch, the length, and the rhythmic pattern of these artificial sounds to create a vocabulary. A sequence of 3 sharp, high notes might mean a patrol has changed its route. A long, wavering low tone could be a warning to stay hidden for the next several hours. The timing was everything. Senders would calculate the wind's speed and direction, releasing their coded burst so the breeze would carry the sound precisely to the listening post, often miles away. This made the message localized, a whisper on the air that dissipated before it could travel too far and reach the wrong ears. Mastering this language required immense skill and patience. Both sender and receiver had to practice for years, learning to distinguish a deliberate signal from the chaotic symphony of the natural world. A misheard note, a rhythm interpreted a fraction of a second too slow, could spell disaster, leading to the capture of a person or the loss of precious, forbidden knowledge. This auditory method, while brilliant for specific terrains, had its limits. It was vulnerable to sudden weather shifts that could scatter the sound, and it required the receiver to be constantly, attentively listening. The need for a more resilient, more versatile method was clear, pushing the architects of Windcode to turn from what could be heard to what could be seen. But the wind speaks in more than just whispers. When silence was paramount or distances were too great for even the most carefully modulated sound, the architects of Windcode turned to the language of sight. They learned to paint messages on the very air using visual wind indicators that were both brilliant and perfectly camouflaged. A sudden plume of colored smoke rising from a distant hilltop, a cloud of fine, glittering dust tossed into a steady breeze. These were not random acts. Each hue and pattern was a carefully chosen word in a silent vocabulary. A burst of red smoke might signal the successful arrival of a smuggler carrying forbidden texts, while a pale blue haze could pinpoint the exact location of a new, hidden cache of knowledge, all relayed across valleys and plains in an instant. In regions blessed with predictable winds, the system grew even more sophisticated. Agents would tie simple strips of cloth or small flags to high branches, transforming entire groves of trees into living signal towers. To any casual observer, these were just decorations fluttering in the wind, perhaps remnants left by travelers. But to a scholar watching from a high vantage point miles away, the specific dance of those fabrics told a detailed story. The wind itself became the pen, writing its message through the movement of the flags. A series of rapid, frantic flutters, driven by a strong gust, could communicate a single, urgent word: danger. A slow, rhythmic, almost lazy wave, sustained by a gentle and constant breeze, might simply mean the path is clear, proceed. This created a resilient, grid-like network across the landscape, where messages were tied not just to the signals themselves, but to their position relative to a known mountain, a distinctive rock formation, or a bend in a river. The sheer genius of this method was its deniability. Every signal was designed to mimic a perfectly ordinary natural event. A wisp of colored smoke could be mistaken for a small cooking fire. A cloud of dust was just a traveler brushing off their clothes. The fluttering flags were merely scraps caught in the trees. There was nothing to confiscate, no device to discover, no physical evidence that could be used in a court of law. It was a system built on the assumption that the most powerful secrets are those hidden in plain sight, carried on the same winds that cooled the brows of the very guards tasked with stopping them. This visual layer added immense complexity to Windcode, but it was the next evolution that truly transformed it from a simple alert system into a language capable of carrying entire books across borders. The sky itself became a co-conspirator in this silent dialogue. Windcode's most brilliant operators understood that their artificial signals were only half the system. the other half was written in the clouds and felt in the air. They were not just signalers, they were naturalists deeply versed in the ancient language of weather. For generations, farmers and sailors had passed down proverbs and observational tricks for predicting the wind's behavior. A red sky at night meant a fair tomorrow. A sudden drop in air pressure signaled an approaching storm. Windcode practitioners absorbed this lore, transforming folk wisdom into a strategic advantage. They knew, for example, that in a particular valley, a specific western wind always blew with great consistency for 2 hours just after dawn. This was not a random event, it was a predictable window. They would schedule their most important message transmissions for this exact period, knowing the wind would carry their sounds or signals with unmatched clarity and reach. This deep integration of meteorology and tradition made the entire system fluid and incredibly difficult to disrupt. An inquisitor might suspect something was amiss, but how do you arrest the wind? How do you intercept a message sent on a breeze that was predicted by a centuries-old saying? The operators could adjust their methods in real time, reading the subtle cues of the environment. If the air grew still and heavy, a sign of a coming storm, they would fall silent, knowing their messages would be lost or distorted. If the wind shifted unexpectedly, they could switch to a backup plan, using a different set of signals designed for that new direction. This required a profound connection to the natural world. A successful Windcode user could glance at the sky, feel the humidity on their skin, and know not only if it was safe to send a message, but also how to send it. Their knowledge made them invisible, their communications masked as mere weather. This symbiotic relationship between human ingenuity and the natural environment was the system's greatest strength, but such a distributed and complex network could not function without the people who dedicated their lives to its operation. These invisible signals were useless without the people who gave them meaning. A lone scholar could send a message, but it took a coordinated human network to carry knowledge across a continent. The true backbone of Windcode was not the signals themselves, but the secret society of messengers and safe houses that gave the system life. These individuals were masters of disguise. You would pass them on the road and see nothing but a humble merchant with his cart of wares, a dusty pilgrim on a holy journey, or a shepherd tending his flock on a distant hillside. Each was a trained operative, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon, their ears attuned to the slightest change in the wind's whisper. They were the living, breathing nodes of a vast clandestine network. Their greatest weapon was their utter ordinariness, a camouflage so perfect it rendered them invisible to the authorities hunting them. When a message arrived, carried on a breeze from a nearby mountain, it was these messengers who decoded its meaning and decided the next step. They did not carry the forbidden books or scrolls themselves, that would be far too dangerous. Instead, they carried the instructions hidden in their minds for where and when to meet the next link in the chain. A series of flag signals from a forest edge might tell a shepherd to travel to a specific crossroads at moonrise. The sound of a reed whistle on the evening wind could instruct a pilgrim to alter their route and seek shelter in a particular village. Their movements were choreographed by the wind itself, a dance of shadows and silence across the landscape. To coordinate this delicate ballet, they relied on safe houses. These were not grand castles or hidden fortresses, but ordinary places that offered extraordinary sanctuary. A remote farmhouse, a secluded monastery, a sympathetic innkeeper's cellar, these were the hubs where the intellectual contraband was processed. Here, in hidden rooms lit by candlelight, the coded messages were finally translated back into written words. A sequence of smoke colors and flag patterns would become a chapter of a banned philosophical text. The rhythmic gusts from a mountain pass would be transcribed into a diagram of the stars, a scientific idea that challenged the established order. the safe house was a place of frantic, secretive labor, where knowledge was rescued from the air and given a temporary physical form before being sent back out into the wind, moving ever closer to its final destination. The entire network was designed with a chilling understanding of the risks. It operated on a cell-based structure, meaning each messenger or safe housekeeper knew only a few immediate contacts. The merchant knew the shepherd who gave him the message and the innkeeper who provided the next safe house, but he had no idea who originated the message or where it would ultimately end up. This was a brutal but necessary form of protection. If a messenger was captured and tortured, the information they could reveal was limited. They could betray the shepherd and the innkeeper, but the rest of the chain would remain intact, allowing the network to repair itself and continue its vital work. This decentralized design was the key to its resilience. It was a system built not on heroic individuals, but on a collective, anonymous determination. The Windcode signals were the language, but these nameless messengers were the voice. They moved through a world of constant danger, guided by breezes and trusted only in shadows, all to ensure that a single, dangerous idea could find its way to a mind ready to receive it. What kind of knowledge was so valuable, so threatening, that it required this immense, secret effort to protect? The wind did not carry simple words, it carried revolutions. The very ideas capable of reshaping the world were the ones deemed too dangerous to possess. This secret network became a conduit for a very specific kind of treasure, intellectual contraband that threatened to upend the established order. Scientific theories that challenged the prevailing view of the heavens were among the most prized and perilous cargo. A series of carefully timed puffs of smoke from a coastal cliff could relay the coordinates of a new star, data that undermined ancient celestial models. A complex sequence of flag movements in a mountain pass might encode the mathematical proof for a heliocentric solar system, a concept so radical it had to be whispered on the breeze long before it could be shouted from the rooftops. Philosophical texts were equally sought after. Translations of Aristotle's works, often banned by authorities who saw them as a threat to theological doctrine, were broken down into countless Windcode signals. A single page of argument, a logical proof that could empower a scholar to think in new ways, would be transformed into a day's worth of flag signals or a week of precisely timed reed whistles. This was not merely about sharing information, it was about smuggling the very tools of critical thought, medical knowledge. The difference between life and death in isolated villages flowed along these invisible channels. The formula for a potent herbal remedy, a surgical technique for setting a bone, these life-saving details were encoded in the dance of cloth strips high in a tree, allowing a healer in one valley to save a life in the next. Even practical knowledge with the power to transform societies was part of this hidden exchange. Detailed maps showing new trade routes beyond the control of taxing lords, astronomical charts that helped farmers predict planting seasons more accurately, designs for improved water mills that could grind grain faster. All of this was considered a threat to those in power. By controlling such knowledge, the powerful maintained control over the people. Windcode broke that monopoly. Each successful transmission of a map or a design was a direct act of empowerment, giving communities the tools to improve their own lives and become less dependent on oppressive systems. The selection of what to send was a deliberate, strategic choice. Every signal sent was a risk, so the content had to be worth the potential cost. It was always knowledge that enlightened, that healed, or that built, never simply to accumulate facts. This careful curation of cargo reveals the ultimate purpose of the entire network. It was not a library, but an arsenal in a silent war for the human mind. How did they ensure these complex, world-altering ideas remained secret during their perilous journey? The answer lies in the ciphers that transformed profound thoughts into innocent breezes. A single gust of wind could contain a chapter from a banned book or a line of forbidden poetry, but only if it was translated into a language only allies could understand. The raw text of a dangerous idea was never sent directly. Instead, it passed through a rigorous encoding process, a mental forge that transformed clear words into cryptic signals. At its heart were substitution ciphers, elegant systems where every letter, word, or concept was replaced by a prearranged wind event. The letter might be a single, sharp whistle blast. The word freedom could be represented by a long, red plume of smoke. A complex philosophical argument might be broken down into a sequence of specific flag movements, each flutter and pause corresponding to a syllable of the argument. This was not a simple one-to-one code, however. The most secure systems used a cipher key, a secret decoder that lived not on parchment, but in the minds of the operators. This key was the linchpin of the entire operation. It might be a memorized phrase, a hidden pattern sewn into the lining of a coat, or even a common book that both sender and receiver possessed. For example, a sequence of 5 whistle blows might not mean a word itself, but would point to the 5th word on the 5th page of that shared book. The receiver, hearing the signal, would mentally consult their copy of the text, find the designated word, and thus reconstruct the message. This method added a powerful layer of security, as the signal itself was meaningless without the key. An inquisitor intercepting the 5 whistles would hear only noise, completely unaware that the secret was hiding in plain sight within the pages of a prayer book or a farmer's almanac. Some messages were so sensitive they required layered encryption, a secret within a secret. The first decoding might reveal what seemed to be an innocent phrase, perhaps a line about the weather or a request for supplies. But this was merely the outer shell. That deciphered text would itself contain a hidden instruction, a clue for a second decoding using a different cipher key. Only after this final step would the true message emerge, its dangerous contents finally laid bare. This multi-stage process was a brilliant defense. Even if an enemy agent somehow acquired one cipher and managed to decode the first layer, they would be met with a decoy, a harmless message that gave no hint of the true knowledge smuggled within. The core idea remained protected, wrapped in layers of misdirection as impenetrable as a fortress wall. This intellectual armor, woven from sound and sight, allowed the most revolutionary thoughts to travel safely, ensuring that the wind carried only confusion to its enemies and clarity to its friends. Deep in the Rhine Valley, the evening hearthfires told more than just stories of the day. For a small, determined group of scholars living under Frankish rule, the simple act of lighting a fire became an act of intellectual rebellion. The rulers of the time viewed many classical Greek texts as dangerous, believing that the philosophies within could challenge their authority and the accepted worldview. These manuscripts were not just books, they were keys to different ways of thinking, and so they were banned, hunted, and destined for destruction. To save them, the scholars engineered a system of communication that was as ingenious as it was invisible, transforming their chimney smoke into a carrier for secret messages. They carefully observed the local weather patterns and noticed that the evening winds blowing down the valley were remarkably consistent, acting like a predictable river of air. This natural phenomenon became their information highway, a particular shade of smoke tinged with the green of burning certain herbs might signal that a patrol had just passed a certain crossroads. A thick, black plume that lingered in the air could mean that a cache of scrolls was ready for retrieval, and a series of quick, white puffs, like breaths in the cold evening air, could carry the most vital information of all, the exact location of a drop point. These signals were not random. They were part of a sophisticated substitution cipher known only to the members of the network. One monastery, perched on a distant hillside, would watch for the smoke from a specific farmhouse. When the correct sequence appeared, a monk would know to prepare for a visitor. The messages were incredibly efficient, allowing the scholars to coordinate the movements of their carriers with precision. A merchant's cart laden with ordinary goods like wool or grain would rumble down a forest path. Hidden in a false compartment beneath the merchandise were the precious Greek manuscripts. Because the merchant had received his instructions via the smoke signals, he knew exactly which path to take, which guard post to avoid, and which secluded farmhouse door to knock on under the cover of darkness. This silent, smoky dialogue between the farmhouse and the monastery created a relay that moved knowledge safely across a landscape teeming with watchful eyes. The success of this operation was staggering. Scrolls containing the works of philosophers and scientists, texts that held the seeds of logic and empirical inquiry, were smuggled from one safe haven to another. These were not just any books, they were the very foundations of reasoned thought that would later fuel the Carolingian Renaissance, a blossoming of art, culture, and learning that reshaped the Western world. The Rhine Valley operation stands as a powerful testament to Windcode's real-world impact. It was not a theoretical exercise, it was a practical tool for cultural survival, proving that even the most oppressive control over ideas could be bypassed by a little observation and a lot of courage. The very landscape they inhabited, with its reliable evening winds and deep valleys, was as much a part of their success as their own ingenuity. This intimate relationship between the system and the terrain raises a fascinating question. How did the physical world itself shape the development of Windcode across different regions? The landscape was not just a backdrop, it was the most crucial piece of their equipment. Windcode could never have flourished on a flat, windless plain. Its true power was unlocked by geography itself. In regions blessed with predictable atmospheric rhythms, the system found its voice. Coastal areas became natural amplifiers for the auditory branch of Windcode. The steady, onshore sea breezes acted as a reliable carrier, while the flat, open expanse of water allowed sounds to travel for astonishing distances without being broken up by trees or hills. A single, modulated whistle from a cliffside could skim across the waves for miles, reaching a listener in a secluded coastal cave with perfect clarity. This was a stark contrast to the dense forests where sound was quickly absorbed and scattered. Meanwhile, mountainous terrain was the undisputed kingdom of visual signaling. The powerful winds that funneled through high passes and deep valleys served a dual purpose. They lifted plumes of colored smoke high into the air, making them visible from dozens of miles away to a watcher on an opposite peak. These same winds also animated the flag signals, causing them to snap and flutter with an urgency that could be read from a great distance. The mountains themselves provided the high vantage points necessary for this silent, long-distance conversation. Even the seemingly barren desert offered unique tools. A skilled operator could read the patterns of dust devils, those miniature tornadoes of sand, or even create their own small, controlled dust clouds. A sudden, unnatural swirl of dust in an otherwise calm area could be a prearranged signal, visible against the stark landscape but easily dismissed as a random weather event by anyone not initiated into the code. This deep environmental awareness meant that operators were not just signalers, they were master cartographers of the air. They meticulously mapped what they called wind corridors, specific pathways through valleys or along coastlines where the wind behaved with consistent speed and direction. These corridors were their information superhighways, allowing messages to be sent with minimal interference and maximum confidence. a message sent through a known wind corridor was as reliable as a letter sent by a trusted courier. This intimate relationship with the terrain highlights the system's incredible versatility. It was not a single, rigid technology, but a fluid set of principles that could be adapted to the whispering gales of the coast, the howling winds of the mountains, or the silent, dusty breaths of the desert. This inherent flexibility meant that as new technologies emerged, from the printing press to more precise meteorological instruments, the core concepts of Windcode were ready to evolve, ensuring its survival in an ever-changing world. They crafted tools from the very world they sought to hide within. A hollowed-out thigh bone from a deer, carefully drilled with finger holes, became more than a simple whistle. It was a precision instrument. By shaping the bore and the mouthpiece, a user could produce a specific, high-frequency tone that could slice through the chaotic roar of a gale, a sound that traveled farther and clearer than the human voice ever could. These were not loud instruments. Their power lay in their purity of pitch, a note designed to be heard by a single waiting ear miles down a wind corridor. For visual signaling, a small, hand-polished bronze mirror or a piece of shaped crystal became a way to paint with light. A quick flash aimed at a distant mountain peak could signal all clear. A series of deliberate, rhythmic flashes might spell out a short, urgent warning. This method was devastatingly effective on clear days, turning the sun itself into a co-conspirator and allowing for near-instantaneous communication across vast distances without a single sound. Some networks even experimented with the first drones, employing kites or small, oiled paper balloons. A tiny, encoded message, written on a scrap of parchment or a thin shaving of wood, would be tied to the kite's string or nestled inside the balloon's basket. Released into a predictable updraft, these simple craft would be carried aloft, riding the wind currents for miles before their string was cut or the balloon descended, delivering its cargo directly into a designated clearing or even onto the roof of a safe house. The true genius of these tools was their perfect camouflage. The bone whistle could be mistaken for a child's toy or a hunter's lure. The signaling mirror was just a traveler's personal effect. The kite was mere recreation, a harmless pastime on a windy hill. There was nothing about them that would alert a suspicious guard, nothing that could be definitively labeled as a tool of espionage. This constant, quiet innovation was a silent arms race against the growing sophistication of surveillance. As authorities became more vigilant, the Windcode practitioners refined their tools, making them smaller, more efficient, and even more discreet. This technological thread, woven through centuries, reveals a community that was endlessly resourceful, never content to rely on tradition alone. Their ingenuity ensured that the river of knowledge never stopped flowing, setting the stage for the profound cultural exchanges that this secret network made possible. A shared secret can build bridges as easily as it bypasses borders. Windcode's greatest legacy may not have been the information it saved, but the unexpected conversations it started between cultures that were supposedly at odds. In the mountains separating Iberia from the rest of Europe, a remarkable dialogue unfolded in the language of the wind. Moorish scholars, masters of astronomy and mathematics, used complex sequences of flag signals from their hilltop observatories to send detailed celestial data. Christian monks in northern monasteries, watching from their own high towers, would receive and record this information, later using it to refine their own calendars and navigation charts. This was not a transaction of spies, but a collaboration of intellects, a silent partnership for the sake of knowledge itself. The system had to adapt to this new, multicultural environment. The original Windcode signals, developed in one linguistic and cultural context, were not sufficient. The Moorish scholars and Christian monks had to create a new, hybrid vocabulary. They fused elements from Arabic numerical systems with Latin scholarly notation, encoding this fusion into their wind signals. A specific pattern of smoke puffs could now represent a complex trigonometric function, a concept understood by both parties despite their different native tongues and faiths. This created a unique third language, one that existed only in the space between their cultures, carried on the air. This exchange went far beyond dry scientific data. Along the same clandestine channels came influences that quietly transformed daily life. The intricate geometric patterns common in Islamic art, translated into a sequence of visual signals, inspired new designs in the illuminated manuscripts crafted by monks in secluded scriptoria. A particular rhythm played on a reed whistle, a musical phrase from a southern tradition, might be picked up by a traveling minstrel and woven into a ballad in a northern court. Even practical knowledge flowed freely, with Windcode messages detailing advanced irrigation techniques from the arid south, allowing communities in the north to improve their crop yields. This was the unintended genius of the system. It became a conduit for culture itself. The very act of collaborating on a secret of this magnitude required a foundation of trust that transcended political or religious decrees. A monk relying on a signal from a Moorish scholar had to trust the accuracy of that information with his life, and vice versa. This mutual dependence, repeated over generations, forged bonds of respect in the shadows. It created a hidden international community of thinkers who identified more with the pursuit of knowledge than with the flags of their kings or the doctrines of their priests. They were united by the wind, partners in a silent conspiracy to enrich the world. This cultural dimension adds a profound layer to Windcode's story, revealing a network that did not just preserve old ideas, but actively manufactured new ones through collaboration. Yet for every bridge built, there was a person standing on it, facing a terrifying abyss. Every signal sent was an act of treason. The individuals operating the Windcode network lived with a constant, chilling awareness of the price of failure. Capture meant more than a slap on the wrist. It meant imprisonment in a lightless dungeon, exile to a foreign land where you knew no one, or a public execution designed to terrify others into obedience. To combat the invisible threat, authorities deployed their own weapons, spies who would pose as sympathetic scholars or desperate refugees. These informants would spend months trying to earn the trust of a network, learning its signals and its safe houses, only to betray it all in a single, coordinated raid. The system's reliance on the natural world, its greatest strength, could also become a fatal vulnerability. In Lombardy, one of the most skilled visual signalers was undone not by a spy, but by the weather. A prolonged drought settled over the region, altering the very air currents he had depended on for years. The winds he had meticulously mapped became weak and unpredictable. His carefully timed plumes of smoke, which should have risen in a straight, clear column, now drifted erratically or dissipated too quickly. This inconsistency caught the eye of a watchful local official who had grown up in the area and knew how the winds should behave. The operator's signal stood out as unnatural, a flaw in the landscape that led authorities directly to his door. His capture sent a shockwave of fear through the entire regional network, forcing a complete and immediate change in their signaling protocols. The danger was never confined to just the messengers. An entire village suspected of harboring a knowledge smuggler could face brutal collective punishment, their homes searched, their goods confiscated, their leaders taken away. This shared risk forged communities bound by a silent, desperate loyalty. Neighbors learned not to ask questions, to look the other way when a strange light flashed from a hilltop at night, to ignore the unfamiliar traveler who arrived with the evening breeze. What could possibly compel people to live under such a shadow? For many, it was a profound sense of duty, a belief that the knowledge they protected was a sacred inheritance for the future. They saw themselves as temporary guardians of a flame that must not be allowed to go out, no matter the personal cost. This unwavering commitment, in the face of such dire consequences, forced the Windcode system to become endlessly adaptive. A method that worked one season might be abandoned the next. Cipher keys were changed frequently. Messenger routes were constantly altered. This relentless pressure, born from the ever-present threat of discovery, did not break the network. It tempered it into something far more resilient and cunning. This stark reality of courage and sacrifice invites a final comparison, a look at how Windcode stood apart from all other forms of secret communication in its time. Other methods of secret communication left a trail that could be followed. A carrier pigeon could be shot down, its tiny message capsule plucked from the sky, and its contents laid bare before an inquisitor. A letter written in invisible ink, no matter how cleverly hidden, was still a physical object that could be discovered in a raid, held over a flame, and its secrets revealed. Windcode operated on an entirely different principle. It left nothing behind. A message sent on the wind existed only for a fleeting moment in the ears of its intended listener or in the brief visual memory of its watcher. Once the sound faded or the smoke dispersed, the message was gone forever. There was no parchment to burn, no device to confiscate, no physical evidence that could ever be used in a trial. This ephemeral nature was its ultimate defense, making betrayal from within the network a far greater threat than any external interception. This did not mean Windcode was universally superior. Its greatest strength was also its most specific limitation. A carrier pigeon could fly on a calm, windless day, and a hidden compartment worked regardless of the weather. Windcode, however, was a prisoner of the atmosphere. It demanded favorable conditions, a predictable breeze, clear visibility, or a specific acoustic environment. In the dead calm of a summer afternoon or during the chaotic turbulence of a thunderstorm, the entire network fell silent, forced to wait for nature's permission to speak again. This dependency also meant that its practitioners required years of specialized training, not just in the ciphers, but in meteorology, geography, and acoustics. A simple tap code on a prison wall could be learned in an afternoon, but mastering the language of the wind was the work of a lifetime. What truly set Windcode apart was its scale and its camouflage. While a subtle hand gesture or a prearranged cough in a crowded market was effective for close-range, momentary contact, such signals were useless across the vast, open landscapes between cities. More importantly, they required the sender and receiver to be in the same place at the same time, exposing both to immediate danger. Windcode, by contrast, created a true long-distance network. It allowed a warning to be sent from a mountain peak to a valley 50 miles away, or a chapter of a book to be relayed from a coastal cliff to a monastery deep inland, all without a single person having to traverse the dangerous territory in between. Its signals were not just secret, they were perfectly camouflaged as the environment itself. A guard might grow suspicious of a traveler who coughed too often, but he would never think to arrest the wind for whistling a peculiar tune through the pines. This unique balance of immense stealth and specific dependency made Windcode the tool of choice for patient, long-term operations, for moving knowledge rather than just momentary alerts. Its successful use, therefore, required not just skill, but a particular kind of brilliant, unconventional mind. This leads us to the stories of the individuals who became legends within this secret world, the master operators whose understanding of the wind was so profound they seemed to command the very air. Elara of the marshes could read the language of the wind in the flight of a bird or the rustle of a reed. Living in the misty fens along the Saxon border, This wise woman was said to possess an almost supernatural connection to the natural world. Her true genius lay in her deep understanding of animal behavior as a predictor of weather. She knew that when the swallows flew low, a shift in the wind was imminent, and when the frogs fell silent, a steady western breeze would follow within the hour. This allowed her to time her signals with uncanny precision. Using simple, hollow reeds, she would produce sequences of sounds that mimicked the calls of local marsh birds. To any outsider, it was just the chatter of the wetlands, but to the messengers waiting in the fog, these coded bird calls provided flawless instructions for moving their precious cargo, bundles of medical texts containing herbal remedies and surgical knowledge that could save lives in isolated villages. Her signals were so reliable that she became a folk heroine, her real work hidden within tales of a mystical crone who commanded the winds themselves. Far from the marshes, in a secluded mountain monastery, another master practiced his art in plain sight. Brother Thuron was a devoted monk whose beautiful singing voice was well known in his community. He realized that the monastery's daily liturgical chants, carried on the wind from the chapel's high windows, could serve a dual purpose. He composed specific hymn melodies, each one corresponding to a different type of emergency. A particular cadence in the morning psalm might mean that royal inspectors were a day's journey away. A shift to a minor key during Vespers could signal that a specific mountain pass was being watched. Because the chants were a normal, expected part of monastic life, his signals were utterly invisible to the authorities. The music, beautiful and pious on the surface, became a lifeline for the network, allowing nearby safe houses to secure their contraband or alter their routes without raising any suspicion. Brother Thuron's innovation demonstrated how Windcode could be woven into the very fabric of daily ritual, making it more resilient than ever. These figures were more than just skilled operators, they were vital teachers. Ilara trained a small circle of apprentices in the subtle art of reading animal signs and crafting indistinguishable reed calls. Brother Thuron carefully instructed a select few junior monks in the meanings behind his musical compositions, ensuring the system would continue long after he was gone. This dedication to mentorship created an unbroken chain of knowledge, passing the secrets of Windcode from one generation to the next. Over centuries, their stories were inevitably embellished, transforming from histories of courageous risk into legends of magical powers and divine favor. This myth-making was not accidental. It reflected the profound reverence people held for those who gambled their freedom to protect the light of knowledge. Their legacy is a reminder that behind every clever signal and every deciphered message was a person who looked at the restless air and saw not just weather, but a promise of a more enlightened future. How did these scattered, secret networks eventually begin to fade from use, and what traces of their ingenuity can we still detect in the world today? A whisper can become a legend, and a legend can outlive the empire that tried to silence it. As the actual practice of Windcode faded, its memory did not vanish, it simply shape-shifted, finding refuge in the one place authority could never fully control, the stories people told their children by the fireside. In these folktales, the careful science of reading the wind was transformed into pure magic. The patient scholar signaling with a reed whistle became a powerful wizard who could command the gales with a word, his messages carried on the breath of storm spirits. The hidden safe house, nestled in a secluded valley, was reimagined as a library of lost wisdom guarded by ancient forest entities who would cloak the knowledge in mist. The stories amplified the system's successes into mythic victories, crediting Windcode not just with saving a few books, but with preserving entire lost civilizations from oblivion or orchestrating the poetic downfall of a cruel tyrant through a storm of perfectly timed signals. These were not histories, they were allegories, fables that used the framework of Windcode to teach a deeper truth, that knowledge itself is a powerful, living force, and that resistance to oppression is a noble, almost sacred endeavor. A grandmother telling a tale of a wind weaver who toppled a castle with a single gust was not just entertaining her family, she was subtly passing down the very spirit of defiance that made the real network possible. This mythological layer served a crucial purpose. It kept the principles of secret communication and intellectual freedom alive in the cultural bloodstream long after the last practitioner had fallen silent. The legends ensured that the idea of Windcode was never truly forgotten, waiting in the collective imagination for a time when its core concepts would be needed again. This poetic end, however, was not a peaceful sunset. It was the quiet closing of one chapter before a technological revolution violently ripped open the next. The printing press did not just make books, it dismantled the very need for secret networks. With the ability to reproduce and distribute knowledge on an unprecedented scale, the written word became a public commodity, no longer a treasure to be painstakingly smuggled one breeze at a time. An idea that once required a week of complex flag signals could now be printed on 100 pages and sent openly through the new, more reliable postal systems that connected cities and nations. The world was slowly opening, and the desperate, clandestine trade in ideas that had sustained Windcode for centuries began to seem almost quaint. This was not an overnight death, but a gradual fading, like a morning mist burned away by the rising sun of a new age. Borders, once rigid and heavily patrolled, became more permeable to commerce and correspondence. The same lords and clergy who had once banned certain texts now found value in the widespread circulation of knowledge, fueling the intellectual fires of the Renaissance. The very urgency that gave Windcode its purpose was evaporating. Why risk your life to send a single chapter on a gust of wind when a complete, bound volume could travel safely in a merchant's unlocked trunk? At the same time, the environment itself was turning against the old methods. Shifts in global climate patterns, the slow cooling of the Little Ice Age, brought more erratic and unpredictable weather. The dependable wind corridors that operators had mapped over generations became less reliable, their rhythms disrupted. A message sent with confidence might be caught in a sudden, unexpected calm, or scattered by a freak squall, leaving the receiver with only silence and doubt. Furthermore, the growth of towns and cities created new landscapes of stone and smoke that altered local wind flows. The clean, powerful drafts that once swept through mountain valleys were now broken and muddled by urban sprawl, making visual signals difficult to see and auditory signals impossible to decipher over the new ambient noise of crowded human life. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the intricate art of Windcode had retreated into the shadows of memory. Its practitioners grew old without passing on their full knowledge, their unique skills no longer in desperate demand. The complex substitution ciphers and signaling techniques were preserved only in scattered oral traditions and a handful of obscure manuscripts, their true purpose often misunderstood by later historians who saw them as curious whether magic or eccentric folklore. The decline of this secret language marked the quiet end of an extraordinary chapter in human history, an era when knowledge was a scarce and dangerous commodity, fought for with breathtaking ingenuity and raw courage. Its obsolescence is a testament to progress, but it also invites a haunting reflection. In our own time of instant digital communication and seemingly boundless information, what have we gained, and what subtle, beautiful methods of connection have we lost forever? That same principle of hiding a message in plain sight now secures our digital world. The medieval art of Windcode finds its direct descendant in a modern technique called steganography. Just as a Windcode operator would hide a dangerous idea within the natural sound of the wind, digital steganography conceals secret information inside an ordinary, innocent-looking file. A family photograph shared online, a popular meme, or a simple audio clip can carry an entirely different, hidden payload. The image looks perfectly normal to anyone scrolling past, but to someone with the correct decryption key, that same file contains a secret document, a private message, or instructions for a political movement. This is the digital equivalent of a flag fluttering harmlessly in a tree, its true meaning visible only to those who know how to read its specific dance. The core concept remains identical. Use the expected, everyday noise of the environment as the perfect camouflage for your signal. This philosophy extends even further into the realm of cybersecurity. Modern encryption systems often rely on embedding data within the massive, constant flow of ordinary internet traffic. Your secret message is broken into tiny pieces and disguised to look like mundane bits of streaming video data or random pings between servers. To a sophisticated surveillance system, it all just blends into the background hum of the network, becoming as invisible and untraceable as a whispered signal on a mountain breeze. This is not merely a technological echo. It is a direct continuation of the same strategic mind that understood the safest place to hide a secret is where everyone is already looking. The ethical questions raised by Windcode are just as urgent today. In nations where governments tightly control the flow of information, activists and journalists use these very techniques to bypass censorship and report the truth. They are the modern-day equivalents of those medieval messengers, risking their freedom to smuggle knowledge across digital borders. The tools have changed from reed whistles to encrypted apps, but the fundamental battle for the right to know and the freedom to share ideas continues unabated. This enduring struggle forces us to ask difficult questions. When is it right to use such covert systems? Is the act of hiding knowledge a noble defense of liberty, or could it also be exploited for malicious purposes? Windcode does not provide easy answers, but it gives us a historical lens through which to view our own complex digital age. Beyond inspiring modern technology, the story of Windcode offers a powerful lesson in low-tech innovation for our high-tech world. Historians and engineers now study these medieval networks as brilliant case studies in resilience. They were systems built without advanced materials, relying instead on a deep understanding of the local environment and human psychology. This makes them a blueprint for designing communication networks in disaster zones, in remote areas with limited infrastructure, or in any situation where modern technology fails or is actively suppressed. The genius of Windcode reminds us that sometimes the most robust solutions are not the most complex ones, but the ones that are perfectly adapted to their time and place. Its legacy is a bridge across the centuries, connecting the whispered secrets of the past with the encrypted packets of the present, and challenging us to protect the free flow of ideas with the same ingenuity and courage. Every act of rebellion forces us to weigh its moral cost. The scholars who operated the Windcode network were not just breaking laws, they were making a conscious ethical choice, believing that the right to knowledge outweighed the duty to obey an unjust authority. For them, smuggling a banned text on medicine or astronomy was a noble act, a necessary defense of culture, and a vital step toward human enlightenment. They saw themselves as guardians of a future they would never live to see, protecting ideas from the flames of ignorance. Yet, this very nobility casts a long and complicated shadow. Could the same system that saved a philosophical treatise also be used to spread a dangerous heresy that incited violence between villages? Might the secret coordination that moved books safely also have been used to plan activities that destabilized communities and brought retribution down upon the innocent? The potential for misuse was a constant, haunting specter. A ruler's agent could argue with some validity that this clandestine network undermined the social order, creating a parallel world of information that operated outside any form of oversight or accountability. This is the central tension, a balance between the undeniable good of preserving life-saving and culture-shaping knowledge, and the risk that the tools of liberation could be twisted into weapons of chaos. Even with the purest intentions, secrecy can sow mistrust and have consequences its architects never foresaw. A messenger might be followed, leading authorities not to a cache of books, but to a safe house where an entire family would suffer for a crime they did not commit. The ethical landscape here is not black and white, but a spectrum of grays that mirrors our most pressing modern debates. The medieval Windcode operator, deciding which scroll was worth the risk, faces the same fundamental dilemma as a contemporary whistleblower, weighing personal safety and legal boundaries against a higher duty to reveal a hidden truth. This timeless conflict between the control of information and the freedom to access it lies at the heart of every society. How then, after the fact, do we judge these secret keepers? Their legacy is not written in official court records, but in the subtle, often conflicted way they are remembered in the fragments of history that survived them. The whispers of the past rarely shout, they linger in the subtle grooves of an artifact or the cryptic note in a margin. Archaeological digs along old borderlands have unearthed small, whistle-like instruments carved from bone or wood. Their significance becomes clear under a microscope, revealing distinct wear patterns around the mouthpiece and finger holes, marks left by thousands of repetitions. These were not toys or simple noisemakers. They were precision tools worn down by a lifetime of sending coded messages on the breeze. Their discovery in remote, strategic locations, like high cliffs overlooking valleys or isolated coastal outcrops, points directly to their use in a coordinated signaling system. These physical objects are the silent, tangible proof of a practice that otherwise vanished with the wind. Alongside these artifacts, the written record offers its own veiled testimony. In the quiet scriptoria of monasteries, scribes copying religious texts would sometimes leave notes in the margins. These glosses, known as marginalia, occasionally contain puzzling references to what they called wind speaking or messages on the air. One such note in a French psalter from the 13th century simply states, "The north wind carries three truths today. To an unsuspecting eye, it reads like poetic musing." But to a historian, it sounds like a record of a successful transmission, a confirmation that three pieces of information arrived safely via a prearranged northern wind corridor. The language itself is a cipher, a deliberate choice to describe the act without ever naming it directly, protecting the writer from accusations of heresy or sedition. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from a rare first-hand account. A diary attributed to a 12th century scholar named Alaric was discovered hidden within the binding of a later legal text. In its pages, he describes with startling clarity how he and his colleagues used predictable evening winds to coordinate. He writes of watching for the smoke from a distant farmstead, noting that a change in its color on a Tuesday would signal the need to alter a meeting place. He even details the anxiety of waiting for a confirming gust of wind after sending his own message, a human moment of fear and hope that brings the entire clandestine operation to life. This personal narrative moves Windcode from the realm of theory into documented history. Piecing together these fragments, the bone whistle from a dig site, the enigmatic marginal note, the anxious diary entry, creates a mosaic of proof. Each piece is small and incomplete on its own, but together they form a coherent picture of a real, practiced art. The very scarcity of this evidence is in itself the most telling detail. It confirms the absolute secrecy that was essential for survival. This lack of a grand, centralized archive invites us to wonder what other clues remain undiscovered, perhaps hidden in plain sight within a forgotten manuscript or lying just beneath the soil of a windswept hill, waiting for a curious eye to see the pattern. The very gaps in the historical record are a testament to Windcode's success. We know it worked because so much of it deliberately vanished, leaving behind a trail of provocative questions rather than simple answers. How far did these networks truly stretch? Were there coordinated exchanges across entire continents, a silent, global conversation passing over the heads of kings and emperors? The specific ciphers used in different regions remain a particular enigma. A signal that meant safe passage in the forests of Germania might have signaled imminent danger in the ports of Sicily, yet we have no master key, no Rosetta Stone for the wind. This deliberate localization was a security feature, but it means we may never fully reconstruct the language they spoke. It is entirely possible that the most brilliant techniques were the ones that left absolutely no physical evidence whatsoever, operating only in the fleeting moment of a sound or a scent carried on a breeze, forever lost to time. Consider the immense challenge of training. How do you teach a complex, secret language without ever writing it down? The knowledge had to be passed from master to apprentice through immersive, sensory experience. A novice would spend years simply learning to read the weather, to feel the shift in air pressure on their skin, to distinguish 100 different sounds in a gusty forest. Only after this foundational understanding was deeply ingrained would the master begin to introduce the signals, layering the code onto a mind already fluent in the language of nature. This was an education of intuition and memory, a living library carried not on shelves but in the minds of a select few. And what of the sea? The ocean is a realm of constant, powerful winds, a perfect highway for such a system. Did merchant ships far from shore use subtle variations in sail trim or flag positions to signal one another, passing market information or warnings of pirates right under the noses of naval patrols? There are tantalizing hints in old maritime logs, references to messages received from empty horizons, but no definitive proof. These unanswered questions are not dead ends. They are the very things that keep the story of Windcode alive and breathing in academic circles. Some linguists and historians now propose that the principles of Windcode, this idea of encoding information in environmental patterns, may have subtly influenced later communication breakthroughs. The optical telegraph systems of the 18th century, with their chains of semaphore towers relaying messages across vast distances, feel like a direct, mechanized descendant of the flag networks in the mountains. Even the earliest experiments in wireless radio, with their dots and dashes traveling invisibly through the air, echo the core Windcode philosophy of sending messages through an unseen medium. The mysteries, therefore, are not a void but an invitation. They encourage us to look at the past not as a settled fact, but as a landscape still rich with undiscovered country, where the wind itself might have been the first internet. This lingering sense of wonder about what might have been inevitably draws us to a deeper question, one that transcends historical fact and touches on the very meaning of the story itself. The wind was not merely a tool for these clandestine operators, it was a profound symbol woven into the very fabric of their worldview. In the medieval mind, wind represented the invisible and untamable forces of the divine, a cosmic messenger carrying prayers to heaven and omens to earth. The great scholar Isidore of Seville himself described the winds as the breath of the world, direct agents of God's will. This spiritual association was not lost on the practitioners of Windcode. When they sent a message on a breeze, they were not just transmitting data, they were participating in a sacred act. They saw themselves as conduits for a higher form of communication, their work sanctified by the very medium they employed. This belief transformed a dangerous task into a holy mission, lending them a powerful sense of legitimacy and moral purpose. The wind's nature perfectly mirrored the knowledge they sought to protect. Truth and wisdom, like the air itself, are intangible, impossible to lock in a chest or burn at the stake. They can be felt, understood, and carried across distances, but never truly captured by earthly powers. A king could ban a book, but he could not arrest the breeze that carried its contents. This philosophical alignment infused their work with a deep sense of destiny. They were not just hiding information, they were aligning with the fundamental nature of reality, working with the currents of change rather than against them. This symbolic layer elevates Windcode from a simple espionage technique to a full-fledged ideology, a silent protest against the very idea that knowledge could be owned or controlled. A faint whisper in a stained glass window, a line of poetry that seems to sigh with the wind. These are the places where Windcode learned to hide in plain sight once more. Long after the last signal faded from the mountain air, its memory found sanctuary in art and literature. Medieval illuminators, those meticulous painters of sacred texts, often filled their margins with scenes of daily life and symbolic imagery. Among these vibrant pages, we sometimes find curious details, like a figure cupping a hand to their ear as a gust of wind carries a scroll toward them. To the untrained eye, it is merely a depiction of the elements, but to those who knew, it was a quiet nod to the practice of receiving messages on the air, a secret preserved in the holy space of a manuscript itself. These artists were often part of the same monastic communities that relied on such networks, and their brushstrokes became another layer of encryption, embedding the reality of Windcode within acceptable religious and artistic conventions. This coded language blossomed in the secular world as well, particularly in the songs of traveling troubadours. Their lyrical poems, filled with courtly love and chivalric ideals, often used the wind as a metaphor for secret communication between lovers kept apart by social barriers. A line like "My words are carried to you on the evening zephyr" was not merely romantic flourish. In a culture where illicit love affairs mirrored the danger of illicit knowledge, such phrases were a perfect allegorical cover. The troubadour singing of a secret born on the gale could be recounting a personal romance, or he could be celebrating the broader, heroic struggle to share forbidden ideas. The audience, understanding both meanings, could appreciate the surface-level beauty while silently acknowledging the deeper, more dangerous truth. This dual interpretation allowed the concept of Windcode to be celebrated and remembered in public forums, its revolutionary spirit disguised as poetic convention. These artistic representations did more than just record a technique. They transformed a practical survival skill into a thing of legend. The reality of Windcode was one of cold nights, aching muscles, and constant fear. But in the illuminated pages and the melodic verses, it became a romantic, almost mystical endeavor. The scholar signaling with a reed whistle was reimagined as a heroic knight of knowledge, his quest noble and pure. This romanticism was crucial, for it ensured that the spirit of Windcode, the idea of resisting intellectual oppression, would endure long after the specific methods were forgotten. It was no longer just a story about how to send a message. It was a story about why sending that message mattered. The cultural imprint left by these artists and poets means that the essence of Windcode was never truly lost. It simply settled into the foundation of our stories, waiting to be rediscovered. This artistic legacy, a testament to the human need to preserve truth through beauty, leads us to our final consideration of what this forgotten art can still teach us about our own world. Windcode's silent struggle across the centuries offers more than just a history lesson. It provides a blueprint for resilience in our own time. The core principles that guided those medieval messengers are strikingly relevant today, reminding us that the fight to share ideas is a constant in human history. Their greatest strength was an ability to innovate with whatever was at hand, turning the simple, observable wind into a complex communication network. This teaches us a powerful truth that profound solutions do not always require advanced technology. Sometimes, the most robust systems are built on a deep understanding of our immediate environment and a creative, adaptive mind. In an era of digital surveillance and centralized control over information, this low-tech ingenuity is a vital inspiration. It encourages us to look for simple, decentralized ways to protect free speech and ensure that crucial knowledge can always find a path around a barrier. The entire Windcode network was fundamentally built on a foundation of community and unshakable trust. A single individual could not smuggle a library. It required a chain of people who relied on each other completely, often without ever knowing the full scope of the operation. This reliance on collective action and shared risk is a model for modern activism and collaborative efforts. Whether it is neighbors organizing to share vital news when the internet goes down or global networks of journalists protecting their sources, the same principle holds true. Our shared commitment to truth is our greatest asset. Studying Windcode gives us a long lens through which to view our current struggles for intellectual freedom. The specific tools have changed, but the underlying conflict between control and access remains the same. Seeing this struggle play out over centuries can be both humbling and empowering. It places our own challenges within a grand, ongoing human story. These timeless insights into adaptation, trust, and quiet defiance are not just historical curiosities. They are practical guides offering a quiet form of hope and a reminder that the drive to connect and to know is a force as persistent and powerful as the wind itself. The story of Windcode is a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be silenced. We have traced its path from the subtle whispers of desert herders to the intricate smoke signals of the Rhine Valley, witnessing how a simple observation of nature blossomed into a sophisticated tool for intellectual liberation. This was not merely a clever trick, it was a profound act of defiance, a declaration that ideas are as free and untamable as the wind itself. The resilience of those messengers, safe housekeepers, and scholars stands as a timeless reminder that the flow of knowledge is the lifeblood of human progress. Their legacy is not confined to the pages of history. It echoes in our modern digital world, where the same battle for information freedom continues under new guises. Let this hidden chapter inspire you to value the open exchange of ideas and to recognize the quiet courage it sometimes requires. If this journey into the past has captivated you, consider subscribing for more stories of historical innovation and share your thoughts on Windcode in the comments below. Remember, sometimes the most powerful messages are the ones carried on the wind.